All right, we are on Genesis chapter 23, which seems pretty short. Does anybody have a break? I don't have a break in mine. Okay, nobody does. Kim, would you read, or
Yep.
if someone else wants to read chapter 23? If you get tired, you can always ask someone else to pick it up. Just name somebody.
All right. Subtitle is Abraham buries Sarah. When Sarah was 127 years old, she died in Hebron in the land of Canaan, where Abraham mourned and wept for her. Then, standing beside her body, he said to the men of Heth, "Here I am, a visitor in a foreign land, with no place to bury my wife. Please sell me a piece of ground for this purpose." "Certainly," the men replied, "for you are an honored prince of God among us. It will be a privilege to have you choose the finest of our sepulchres, so that you can bury her there." Then Abraham bowed low before them and said, "Since this is your feeling in the matter, be so kind as to ask Ephron, Zohar's son, to sell me the cave of Machpelah down at the end of his field. I will, of course, pay the full price for it, whatever is publicly agreed upon, and it will become a permanent cemetery for my family." Ephron was sitting there among the others, and now he spoke up, answering Abraham as the others listened, speaking publicly before all the citizens of the town. "Sir," he said to Abraham, "please listen to me. I will give you the cave and the field without any charge. Here, in the presence of my people, I give it to you free. Go and bury your dead." Abraham bowed again to the men of Heth and replied to Ephron as all listened, "No, let me buy it from you. Let me pay the full price of the field, and then I will bury my dead." "Well, the land is worth 400 pieces of silver," Ephron said. "But what is that between friends? Go ahead and bury your dead." So Abraham paid Ephron the price he had suggested, 400 pieces of silver, as publicly agreed. This is the land he bought: Ephron's field at Machpelah near Mamre, and the cave at the end of the field, and all the trees in the field. They became his permanent possession by agreement in the presence of the men of Heth at the city gate. So Abraham buried Sarah there in the field and cave deeded to him by the men of Heth as a burial plot.
Hey, Cindy, whenever you're ready.
23, 1 and 2. Although Sarah's age, the only woman's age at death recorded in Scripture, might suggest her importance in God's plan, it more importantly reminds us of the birth of her only son when she was well beyond childbearing age at 90 years, and of God's intervention to bring about the fulfillment of his word to her and Abraham. Sarah's death occurred 2028 BC. Verse 3, the sons of Heth, a settlement of Hittites whose original home was in Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey, who had already been established in Canaan, far from homeland. Verse 4, give me property. Negotiations for the purchase. Give signifies sell of Hittite property was properly conducted in accordance with contemporary Hittite custom, with Abraham wanting to pay the fair market value for it. Verse 6, a mighty prince among us. Rank and reputation accorded Abraham a place of leadership and respect leading his neighbors, the Hittites, to freely offer their best sepulchres to him. They went on and arranged for Abraham to purchase a cave that belonged to a wealthy neighbor called Ephron, unknown to Abraham. Verse 10, dwelt, literally was sitting, perhaps at the city gate where business was usually transacted. Verse 11, I give you the field. This suggests not that Ephron felt generous, but that he was constrained by Hittite feudal polity, which had tied ownership of land with service to the ruler. Passing the land to Abraham would pass also feudal responsibilities to Abraham,
Wait a minute,
making
I'm
him,
confused. Oh, go ahead, finish it. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
Well, so he's saying that if he had given the land to Abraham, then he would have still controlled the land, but Abraham would have had to taken care of it.
He would pass all feudal responsibilities to him.
But he would still own it then, or no?
I would think because it says would make him liable for all taxes and duties.
Okay.
Yeah, it tied ownership of land with service to the ruler. So he would then also fund these to him.
You were breaking up there. Uh-oh.
All feudal responsibility.
You're breaking up, Cindy.
Now,
You're breaking up.
okay.
Can you hear me? Get my John MacArthur out here.
5:11.
Can can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, she's breaking up, so I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Um,
Cindy's in and out.
can someone send her a text and tell her that she's breaking up? Negotiations for the purchase, give signifies here sale of Hittite property was properly conducted in accordance with contemporary Hittite custom, with Abraham wanting to pay the market price. Rank in verse 6. I guess that's where she was. Rank and reputation accorded Abraham a place of leadership and respect, leading his neighbors, the Hittites, to freely offer their best sepulchres to him. They went on and arranged for Abraham to purchase a cave that belonged to a wealthy neighbor called Ephraim, who was unknown to Abraham. I remember her saying that. Verse 10, Ephraim was probably sitting at the city gate. She did say that. Verse 11, I give you the field, suggests not that Ephraim felt generous, but that he was constrained by Hittite feudal feudal polity, which tied ownership of land with service to the ruler. Oh, so Abraham would serve him then, maybe?
But
Passing,
whoever the ruler of the land is, I'm understanding it. I don't know who they're
like if
like
he
the
gave it to Abraham, I'm trying to think if it's a cultural thing. Like if he gave it to Abraham, did that mean Abraham owned the land, or he still owned the land but allowed Abraham to?
I think Abraham owns it. Abraham's responsible for it, and now Abraham's in servitude of the community, the political whoever, the mayor, the city council. I don't know,
But I would think if he bought it, he would have the same responsibilities. Let's
Mm,
see what else it says. Passing the land to Abraham would pass also the feudal feudal responsibilities to Abraham, making him liable for all taxes and duties. This Ephraim was apparently anxious was apparent this Ephraim was apparently anxious to do, thus the offer to give the land. Verse 16, the shekels of silver according to weights. Precious metals were not made into coins for exchange until centuries later. Merchants maintained the shekel as the standard weight of value for business transactions. A shekel weighed less than half an ounce. Verses 17 and 18. With the words of the transaction, the careful description of the property, and the payment of the stated price all done before witnesses and all proper place at the proper place of business, ownership of the land officially passed to Abraham. It was still binding years later in the time of Jacob. So it continued to be his.
See, I have a completely different rendition of that exchange in my footnotes about the meaning of it.
Yeah, go ahead. Because I think that what it's saying here doesn't make sense because why would he be anxious to pass that off to Abraham?
I don't know, but mine.
Abraham's buying it and he's going to do that anyway. So, like, why would it make a difference of the money?
All right. So mine reads, the polite interchange between Abraham and Ephron was typical of bargaining at that time. Ephron graciously offered to give his land to Abraham at no charge. Abraham insisted on paying for it. Ephron politely mentioned the price, but said, in effect, that it wasn't important. Abraham paid the 400 pieces of silver. Both men knew what was going on, but went through the bargaining process. If Abraham had accepted the land as free gift when it was offered, he would have insulted Ephron, who then would have rescinded his offer. Many shopkeepers in the Middle East still follow this ritual with their customers, but the customer would find himself in jail if he took the shopkeeper up on his initial offer. 400 pieces of silver was a high price for the piece of property Abraham bought. The Hittites who lived in the land weren't thrilled about foreigners buying up lots of property, so Abraham had little bargaining leverage. Ephron asked an outrageous price. The custom of the day was to ask double the fair market value of the land, fully expecting the buyer to offer half the stated price. The worth of a piece of silver.
You just cut out, Kim. Oh, okay. So if I'm understanding correctly, Abraham had to do a transaction showing that he bought the land. You cut out, Kim.
Oh,
There you are. I hear you now. So is he saying that, like, Abraham, if just for Ephraim to, let's say you can have the land, then there wasn't an official transaction and he could take
he's
that
saying
land back?
no, he's just saying it was socially unacceptable to accept. It was Ephron's basically uh, 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 I can't think of the word, the duty, like traditional duty
Yeah.
to offer it for free. But it was Abraham's traditional duty then to say, oh, no, no, I'll give you what you ask. He actually didn't have to give him by standards the full 400.
Yeah.
He could have come back and negotiated only half, but he gave Ephron the full amount. So he overpaid, but it
Okay.
was just a matter of ceremonial, traditional standards.
Okay, so 17 to 18 in John MacArthur says, with the words of the transaction, the careful description of the property, and the payment of the stated price all done before witnesses at the proper place of business, ownership of the land officially passed to Abraham. It's still binding years later in the time of Jacob. This is, I was going to look this up and I forgot to, but like the Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, maybe Rebecca, like they're all, and it spells Israel. They're all, there's an E missing. They're all buried there now. Like that's
Mm.
still the gravesite today. But I don't remember the details around that. I just remember learning that when I was over there. Verse 20, the field and the cave were made over. This is an important summary because finally, years after nomadic wandering, Abraham owned a small piece of real estate in the midst of, oh, I never thought about that because he never owned any land. He moved, he was the man of the tent. In the midst of all the land divinely promised to him and his descendants, this cave also became, many years later, the family, oh, here we go, burial plot for Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, Leah, and Jacob, with Rachel being the exception.
Hmm.
Okay, that's the end of 23 and John MacArthur. Kathy, when you're ready. Cindy, I hope you can hear us okay.
Okay. The death of a princess. Sarah had been a good wife to Abraham, a good mother to Isaac. Yes, she had her faults, as we all do, but God called her a princess and listed her with the heroes and heroines of faith. The Apostle Peter named her a good example for Christian wives to follow, and Paul used her to illustrate grace of God in the life of a believer. Abraham's tears, verses 1 and 2. How often in my personal pastoral ministry I have heard well-meaning but ignorant people say to grieving friends or relatives, "Now don't cry." That is a very poor counsel, for God made us with the ability to weep, and he expects us to cry. Even Jesus wept. Grieving is one of God's gifts to help heal broken hearts when people we love are taken from us in death. Paul did not tell the Thessalonian Christians not to weep. He cautioned them not to sorrow as others who have no hope. 1 Thessalonians 4:13-18. The grief of a believer should be different from that of an unbeliever. Abraham loved his wife, and her death was a painful experience for him. He showed his love and his grief by his weeping. These are the first recorded tears in the Bible, and tears will not end until God wipes them away in glory. Revelation 21:4. Even though he was a man of faith, Abraham did not feel his tears were an evidence of unbelief. Sarah died in faith, so Abraham knew that she was in the Lord's care. In the Old Testament, very little was revealed about the afterlife, but God's people knew that God would receive them when they died. And there's a reference to Psalm 73:24. The late Vance Havner and his wife had a wife named Sarah. Shortly after her untimely death, I was with Dr. Havner at the Moody Bible Institute, and I shared my condolences with him. "I'm sorry to hear you lost your wife," I said to him when we met in the dining room. He smiled and replied, "Son, when you know where something is, you haven't lost it." For the believer is to be absent from the body means to be present with the Lord. So Christians do not approach death with a fear. Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord, that they may rest with from their labors, and their works do follow them. Revelation 14:13. The death of the wicked is vividly described in Job 18, and what a fearful picture it is. When the wicked died, is like putting out a light, trapping an animal or a bird, catching a criminal, or uprooting a tree. What a difference it makes when you know Jesus Christ as your Savior and as the resurrection and the life. Abraham's testimony, verses 3-6. We cannot mourn over our dead forever. There comes a time when we must accept what has happened, face life, and fulfill our obligations to both the living and the dead. Because he was not a citizen of the land, Abraham had to request a place to bury his wife. The truth was that Abraham owned the whole land. God had given it to him, but there was no way he could convince his neighbors of that. Like Abraham, God's people today are pilgrims and strangers in this present world. We live in tents, which one day will be taken down when we move to glory. When Paul wrote, "The time of my departure is at hand," he used a military word that meant to take down a tent and move on. Our present body is temporary, but one day we will receive a glorified body like the body that Jesus Christ now has in heaven. The men of the land called Abraham a mighty prince, which in the Hebrews is a prince with God. He had a good testimony among them, and they respected him. Even though this world is not our home, we must be careful as pilgrims and strangers to have good witness to those who are outside the faith. These Hittites did not worship Abraham's God, but they respected Abraham and his faith. In fact, they offered him the use of one of their own tombs, but Abraham refused. It is a wonderful thing in a time of sorrow when the child of God has a strong witness to the lost. There is a natural sorrow that everyone expects us to manifest, but there is also a supernatural grace that God gives so that we may have joy in the midst of sorrow. The unsaved can tell the difference, and this gives us opportunity for sharing the good news of the gospel. Abraham's tact, verses 7 to 16. In the East in that day, most business transactions were carried on at the city gate with the people as witnesses. Arriving at the final price for a piece of property usually involved a great deal of bargaining and deferential politeness that sometimes covered up greed and intrigue. But Abraham was open and honest in his request. He wanted to buy the cave of Machpelah from Ephron, who was in the crowd at the time. Following the custom of the East, Ephron offered to give Abraham not only the cave, but the whole field in which the cave was located. Of course, this was only a clever maneuver on his part, for he had no intentions of giving away a valuable piece of property, especially to a man as wealthy as Abraham. But Ephron's reply gave Abraham two pieces of information. Ephron was willing to sell, but he wanted to sell the whole field and not just the cave. Ephron had Abraham in a corner, and he knew it. Sarah had to be buried soon, and Ephron had the only piece of property that met Abraham's needs. So Abraham agreed to buy both the cave and the field, even before Ephron named the price. That is really living by faith. Ephron's price was far too much, but Abraham paid it and claimed the property for himself. In Acts 7:15 to 16, Stephen seems to contradict the Genesis record by saying that Abraham bought the property from Hamor and it was located in Shechem rather than Hebron. But surely two different burial places are in view here. It is likely that Abraham bought a second burial plot from Hamor in Shechem and that Jacob had to buy it back years later. Since Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob moved about quite a bit, it would be difficult for the residents of the land to keep track of them and their family real estate. In our business dealings with the people of the world, we must be careful to maintain honesty and integrity and to put our witness for the Lord ahead of monetary gain. Abraham knew that Ephron had him trapped and that it was foolish to haggle over the price, as much as Easterners love to do it. Abraham's tomb, verses 17 to 20. Hang on 1 minute. Okay, sorry. The key phrase in the chapter used 7 times is bury. Bury my dead. Even though Sarah was gone, Abraham showed respect for her body and wanted to give it a proper burial. This is the pattern of God's people throughout the scriptures. This is a pattern for God's people throughout the scriptures. Neither the Old Testament Jews nor the New Testament Christians cremated their dead. Rather, they washed the body, wrapped it in a clean cloth with spices, and placed it in the ground or in a tomb. While there may be some situations when cremation is the better way to dispose of the body, for the most part, Christians prefer burial. This is the way our Lord's body was handled after his death, and Paul seems to teach burial in 1 Corinthians 15:35 to 46. When Abraham purchased the cave of Machpelah for a tomb, he was making a statement of faith to all who were there. He did not take Sarah back to their former home in Ur, but buried her in the land God had given him and his descendants. He did not ignore the body, but gave it a proper burial in view of the promised resurrection. When God saves us, he saves the whole person, not just the soul. The body has a future, and burial bears witness to our faith in the return of Christ and the resurrection of the body. It must be pointed out, however, that resurrection is not reconstruction. God will not reassemble the dust of the body and restore the body to its previous state. God promises us a new body. In 1 Corinthians 15:35-38, Paul makes it clear that there is continuity, but not identity, between the old body and the new body. He illustrated this miracle with the planting of the seed. The seed dies and decays, but from it comes a beautiful flower or some grain. There is continuity, but not identity. The same seed does not come out of the ground, but what came from the seed that was planted. Christian burial bears witness that we believe in a future resurrection. When you get to the end of Genesis, you find that Abraham's tomb is quite full. Sarah was buried there, and then Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah. And then Jacob joined them. Genesis ends with a full tomb, but the four Gospels end with an empty tomb. Jesus had conquered death and taken away its sting. Because of his victory, we need not fear death or the grave. Abraham owned the whole land, but the only piece of property that was legally his was a tomb. If the Lord Jesus does not return to take us to heaven, the only piece of property each of us will own in this world will be a plot in the cemetery. We will take nothing with us. We will leave it all behind. But if we are investing in things eternal, we can send it ahead. If we live by faith, then we can die by faith. And when you die by faith, you have a wonderful future. In November 1858, missionary John Paton landed in the New Hebrides to establish a ministry among the people. On February 12, 1859, his wife gave birth to a son, and on March 3rd, his wife died. 17 days later, the baby died. But for Jesus and the fellowship he gave me there, said Paton, I must have gone mad and died beside that lonely grave. But we do not sorrow as those who have no hope. We have been born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. And we are looking for that blessed hope and the glorious appearing of the great God and our Savior, Jesus Christ. That's it.
That makes more sense to me that Ephron was kind of getting money from Abraham because Abraham was wealthy, that he wasn't intending to be kind.
Kathy, I think when you were reading it was saying Rebecca's in the cave, but I'm thinking then the other, what Cindy and Chrissy were reading, it said Rebecca was not.
It was
Rachel.
Rachel.
Oh, Rachel. Okay.
So we have Isaac, Sarah, Rebecca, Abraham, Jacob, and Leah that end up buried together.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting too that God already gave him that land. So it did really belong to him. It just wasn't physically there yet.
You know, it kind of tells me something about Ephron's character, though. So first, because it was just tradition, he offers it for free, and knowing that Abraham's going to say, "Oh, no, I'll pay for it," but he asked twice as much as what it was worth, knowing, like you said, because Abraham was wealthy.
Well, I
And
think it's tradition over there too. Like when you go to a store over there to buy something, when they say like they'll Jew you down, that they do actually do that. Like, so I am not someone, I just want you to tell me how much you want and I'll decide whether that's worth it to me. And if I want it, I'll buy it. Over there, that's not how it works. They give you a price on something. Nothing's priced. They give you a price and then you bicker with them and get them to come down on the price. So what Ephraim was doing was he made it twice the amount, thinking Abraham would come back and say, "Oh, I'll give you 200." But Abraham didn't. He was like, "You can have the 400."
yeah,
That showed how much it was worth to Abraham, actually.
yeah.
Did you ever hear the lullaby that the Jewish mothers sing to their babies?
Mm-mm.
My low, so high. My low, so high.
So that's true. It's not discriminatory. Like some people are like, oh, that you shouldn't say that. It's like it's true. It's how they do Jew you down. Like it is true. Okay, Tony. Sarah died, verse 1. Sarah died at the age of 127 years, which may seem like a random detail. However, I see God's gracious provision here. Sarah was 90 years old when Isaac was born. Not only too old to have children, but also too old to spend any significant time with them. And yet, God gave Sarah almost 4 decades with her son. Even the span of our short lives rests in the hands of God who cares about these details. 2 through 20. Why all this talk about a burial plot? Remember where Abraham was in Kereth Arba, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Abraham was in the land of promise and saw in his wife's death the opportunity to seize the first fruits of God's promise. This explains why he insisted on paying the full price for his burial plot. Rather than receiving it as a gift, as Ephron and the other local leaders desired, Abraham knew he could hold no lasting right to a gifted grave. An actual sale, on the other hand, with an exchange of money and a company of witnesses, would give him a toehold in possessing the land of Canaan. That's it. That makes more sense. That there was actually like witnesses and an exchange. Because maybe Ephraim could have come back and been like, yeah, well, I really own that land. Any other thoughts?
I thought it was interesting too in here where it said that this was the first recorded tears in the Bible where Abraham was weeping over his wife.
Oh, yeah. I imagine Eve would have cried. They didn't say it though.
Yeah. It just said first recorded. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that others who had lost somebody or something didn't at some point, but
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely loved her. No other thoughts? Input? Oh,
I
yeah.
have
Go ahead.
I have a Warren Worsby devotional, and it was funny. Kathy read that, and my concordance didn't have anything in there for 23. But it explains a little bit about the land in Ephron, and I'm trying to discern like what is. I can read it if you want.
Sure.
Gretchen in Moresby,
Uh-huh.
it went from chapter 22 to 24, and then it goes back to chapter 23.
Oh, okay. So I didn't look far enough
I
ahead.
found that out yesterday. I thought, why don't they have chapter 23 in here?
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I'm like, I have his devotional commentary, and I'm like, but it's like a little brief thing. It says Genesis 23, Abraham the mourner. Sarah is the only woman named in the Bible whose age is given and burial described. It was the death of a princess, a woman of faith, Hebrews 11 to 13, 1 Peter 3 through 6. Abraham felt the pain of his loss and openly expressed his grief. Faith is not the enemy of tears, for we sorrow as those who have hope. 1 Thessalonians 4 13 to 18. Jesus wept, John 11:35, even though he knew he would raise his friend from the dead. Abram the sojourner. Ephron did not plan to give Abraham a piece of land, but that is how typical Eastern bargaining always begins. The land already belonged to Abraham, 15:7, but he could never explain that to his unbelieving neighbors. He was a pilgrim and did not claim any of it for himself. Abraham, the owner, he paid a high price for what became one of the most famous tombs in Bible history. And eventually 6 people were buried there, and that's in Genesis 49, 31 through 32. Abraham owned only one thing on earth, a grave. Genesis ends with a full tomb, but the gospel story ends with an empty tomb. And because Jesus Christ lives, we who trust in him never need fear death.
Where was that? Genesis 49?
Yeah, I did look that up too. 49 to 31 through 32.
Okay. It just probably because of Jacob being at the end.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other input? If not, we're going to do our trivia, which I think it will be a race to see who's first. All right. You ready? Who prayed in the temple for a son?
Sarah.
Elizabeth.
Isaac. Abraham.
Abraham. Elizabeth.
Oh, I thought you all would have it. You will. You'll be like, oh, duh. Who prayed in the temple for a son?
Hannah.
Zachariah.
Who-
Oh, Hannah.
Who said Hannah?
Cindy.
Good job, Cindy. You are right. You can find that in 1 Samuel 1, 9 through 11. Until tomorrow.
For sure and for
For certain.
Don't hang up yet.